Geico presents Sharing versus Oversharing. Today, Bridget Griffin shared a video of her daily yoga routine, 2 self-help articles, and her new blog called Build Your Inner Bridge with Bridge. Girl, your sharing has turned into oversharing. No worries, Bridge. Geico has some info worth sharing with your 7 blog followers, like how you could save money on your car insurance, update your policy, and report a claim just by visiting geico.com. How's that for building your inner bridge? Bridge? Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
Blog Talk Radio.
We are the UR Tennis Network. Our mission is to be the voice of tennis. We enlist a team of passionate enthusiasts to promote our sport. We strive to bring interesting perspectives on the many spins of tennis. Our goal is to provide the learners of our sport with current news and information from many angles. We seek active participation from communities interested in tennis, but tennis is not interested in them. We are expanding our outreach. Tennis is a true lifetime sport that needs to be talked about, and the UR Tennis Network pledges to pursue this idea relentlessly.
Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Parenting Aces radio show on Blog Talk Radio's UR Tennis Network. I'm your host, Lisa Stone, and I am actually pre-recording this week's show with Dr. J. And those of you who have been following along for a while, you know that I have been working relatively closely with Dr. Neeru Jayanthi, who is an orthopedic surgeon here in Atlanta. He has started a tennis medicine practice at Emory here in the Atlanta area and is really committed to the research side of injury prevention, injury treatment in junior tennis players, but also adult players. And the focus of today's show is really on the college level tennis player, preventing injury prior to getting to college, and then maintaining a healthy body throughout the college tennis process, and what the responsibility is of the player, what the responsibility is of the coach, where training comes in. And Dr. J just has an incredible body of knowledge and is doing research as we speak, trying to increase that body of knowledge so that parents can be educated, players can be educated, coaches can be educated, and we can keep these kids playing tennis in a healthy way for the duration, however long that is. But I'm just so pleased to have Dr. J back on the show. Neeru, thanks so much for being with us again, and I love the work you're doing. So thanks for sharing it with Parenting Aces. Neeru, you there? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm there.
I muted you accidentally. I'm so sorry.
Don't worry, my wife does that pretty regularly, so it's okay. If she had a button that actually worked, it would be used quite often. But yeah, no, I really appreciate what you do, as far as messaging for parents and coaches out there. I'll make one small correction, is actually I'm not an orthopedic surgeon, but I'm a medical primary care sports medicine doctor who does non-surgical work.
Sorry.
So since
sorry.
No, it's okay. No. I work closely with our surgeons, and fortunately, about 95% of the time, at least, especially in juniors, we don't have to worry about surgical issues. But yeah, so we kind of focus on the sports medicine aspects and the total health. But yes, this is I particularly wanted to approach you about this topic. After a talk, I was invited to speak at the ITA College Coaches Convention in December, and I always feel like those conferences are great, but using your avenue to reach out even more people to disseminate this information is just invaluable. So I think you have the talk, you'll have it publicly available. There's nothing for me to hide. Education is free. And we really want to just get the proper messaging out from what we had with the coaches there.
Yeah, and to my listeners, he's referring to some PowerPoint slides that he shared with me that I am going to try and figure out how to upload to ParentingAces.com. And so keep an eye out for those. They're really, really informational and useful, not not just for us parents, but, I think important for the players themselves to familiarize themselves with, and as well as junior coaches who are responsible for getting these kids ready for college tennis and keeping them healthy. And so, Neeru, thank you, for sharing that and making it available to my audience. I'd love for you to just jump right in and talk about why you even felt like there was a need to have this conversation and give this talk at the ITA Coaches Convention and what's coming out of that.
Yeah, it's actually like the one category of folks I had not had a chance to speak in front of as far as tennis-related issues and the medical issues. And so, first of all, very excited to do that. But I think some of it stems from, we've done work on junior tennis players and young athletes of all sports, actually, and looked, a lot of injury risk and how much you train. I think last time we talked quite a bit about sport specialization. But when I got in front of the coaches, I mentioned two important studies that have come out that were not encouraging, because we're all about promoting sport, promoting the goal to get into college, and I did not find these encouraging. Two alumni studies comparing student athletes or former student athletes or alumni who previously had played competitive college sports versus those who just were recreational, non-student athletes. And when you look at data after graduating from college and you compare their exercise habits, they were no different. But when they compared their overall life, what we call their health ratings, the health ratings of the student athletes were poorer. And that's been in two pretty large studies. And then it made me really concerned from just from an overall big picture point of view is, we make this such a big goal from the beginning, and then at the end of it, have we accomplished the goal, which I think is lifelong participation in the sport? And so I presented that to the coaches. I said, look, your role is far more than just what happens those 4 years of college. It is highly influential for the many years prior to college to influence what junior players do to try to get into college, then the 4 years that they're in college, and then actually how you've created an environment of tennis for them in their life after college. And so I think that's where I got kind of sensitive to it. And so it was really interesting to have a good conversation with the coaches on that particular point.
And did you get good response from the coaches? I mean, were they amenable to having this conversation? Because, you're putting out there that you want them involved way longer than just that 4 years of NCAA eligibility. And these coaches are busy. They've got a lot on their plate.
I actually, and it's always interesting, when you go and people that are there are the ones that are most interested in trying to do more things to improve their body of knowledge. And so, and nothing against coaches who weren't there, but so the coaches in that room actually were very excited to do more. They felt empowered. And when I said, look, think of it, and I kept asking questions like, what age do you think you can start telling, a parent that their child, has D1 material, it's D2 material, and things like that. And they really, thought about that. And they said, really no earlier than, 14, 15, 16 years old. They really felt like, they want these kids to develop and really kind of get a better sense of it. They felt empowered of trying to create a lifelong pathway for tennis. So I think there was a lot of positive energy in the room. And, I'm coming from as a perspective of a tennis person. Like, my thing is, like, I want everyone to be playing tennis all the time. So I want them to play in college. I want them to, the second, I got off the tennis court just now, and, I know you had a AA match, I think, or an Alta match. And, so I'm very much, I want this path to continue. So the question I asked them, actually, I said, what percentage of your graduating college seniors continue to play the year or two after, they're done with college tennis? And the number of hands that were raised were small. And that's what told it right there. I think that's the answer that they all kind of knew. But then when you look around the room, you say, hey, look, maybe we're not creating a lifelong path for tennis, but more a shorter course for tennis. And I think that's where we can kind of all work together, try to make sure it's a lifelong fulfillment.
So let's talk about your findings. I know you rely a lot Mark Kovacs's studies, and Mark's done some great research and published some really good stuff out there, which, I try to tweet the links to all of his stuff too. But what are you finding in terms of kids coming into college healthy, being able to stay healthy, especially that first semester or first year where there's so much new in their lives, and they're training in a different way, and they've got the stress of school and all of that. I'm just really curious what the research is showing these days, and then we can talk about your recommendations for making things better.
Yeah. So the problem, first of all, when I was in Chicago, part of the reason I came down here is basically most of the colleges I work with did not have college tennis, which drove me nuts. And so we did a lot of Division I and various level of college athlete studies, minus tennis. So I don't have the epidemiology personally. Other ones that were published are relatively low, and they're smaller studies, and they don't include everyone. And the NCAA just recently started collecting data on tennis because Brian Hainline, who the CMO of NCAA now, played college tennis, and he used to run USTA, chief medical officer. So someone's actually paying attention to tennis, but they're also paying attention to football. So if you actually just look at numbers and rates, football, for example, will have about 50 injuries per every 1,000 times they're out there, and then tennis at the college level may have like less than 10. And so that's not really actually an accurate measure of what happens, because tennis is much more than just like whether or not you hurt your elbow, hurt your knee, and that type of stuff. It's very obvious in football. When you tear your ACL, you fracture your wrist, and you're out, and everyone it's an aha moment. This is mental health, physical health, nagging overuse injuries, that you're still participating, but it's every day you're in the treatment room, and so they don't get recorded in the same way. And so I'll bring up mental health because Dr. Hainline's number one goal actually with college athletes across the board is actually addressing mental health. And he has literally personally gone to countless campuses interviewing many student athletes, and actually a very large NCAA document came out, discussing many aspects of that, including parental expectations versus the athletes' expectations about where they would be, their own personal expectations, their happiness, their balance with school, and all of these things. And he really felt that there is quite a bit of work that needs to be done. And I think so. It's much more than just the injury rate. So I don't want to diminish the importance of college tennis and the issues that are going on based on the data that suggests it's not that bad. So that's the big picture. So and I'll talk about kind of stroke evaluations. I think maybe we can talk about that later, because that's less important to me than having a great college experience and then beyond.
And what is a great college experience? What does that look like in your mind?
That is a really tough one, because you want to make sure that the mismatch between a kid's expectations about what it is to play college tennis is not too different than what the reality is or what their coach's expectations are. And some people have phenomenal experiences, and I really, really endorse that, and I hope they get it. And that includes what your expectations are about how much time commitment's involved, what happens when you have to battle through injuries, and what happens, as far as, the pressures involved of, being successful on the court and getting the lineup and all those types of things. So and to be honest, this is not unique to tennis. I have great respect for any college athlete. Every time I work with a college student athlete, when I would see him in the training room, I'd say, regular college students go through, and it's very challenging. Freshman year, sophomore year, you have to go, balance workload, do well in school, be successful, make friends, have relationships, and, have the normal college student experience. And then if you add, the numbers of hours, actually, if you look at the NCAA data that just came out, while you may only be practicing 16, 20 hours a week, the number of hours committed towards the sport are much higher, and no one really keeps track of long bus rides and travel time and all these other things, and things that you're doing on your own that aren't organized practice. And I mean, it is nearly a full-time job. On average, NCAA Division I athletes are in their 30s, per week. Think of it. All the other kids are, in college don't have that many hours per week dedicated to it. So I think that overall life experience and that balance is really critical. And I think, and I'm not the one to advise coaches that this is how you have to do things, and it's a challenging job for a coach, but I think you have to put in perspective of their whole experience, and it's a tough challenge to balance it all. And it is not too different from the first and second years of medical school. I would almost put it in that category, like understanding the balance of how much commitment you have towards what you're doing there.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And so, we hear of kids getting injured and, how they manage that and all of that. What are some ways that players and junior coaches can ensure or at least, position themselves favorably to avoid injury during those early days where they're adjusting to all of these changes that you just mentioned?
Some would argue, and I might be one of those people, that by the time they get to college, they're already broken. And that's kind of like it's not just tennis, but tennis is certainly one of the culprits. It's actually, I think, one of the first or second most intensely trained sport prior to getting to college, and that's based on the NCAA data that they just put out, particularly the intensity that starts before the age of 12. So I think that's that. So when I say the college coach's power is when you're as a college coach, you're talking to young junior players and their parents and say, what does it take to get there? I think you have to be in the mindset that you want them to be healthy by the time they show up. You have had someone who's already had one or two stress fractures in either their back or, they've had a wrist surgery or they've had, multiple issues going on. And we, when I was, as a team doctor, and you have no control over who ends up, coming to the school. Every now and then I would have a coach who would ask me and say, hey, what do you think about this person coming here? But sometimes you get kids who have had so much by the time they get there, the likelihood that they're going to go on to have another injury is exceedingly high. And I think what you have to do at that point is then accept that there are some kids who have to train, for example, at different volumes. And it's a hard one to swallow. This happens not infrequently. Like, for example, distance running. Some people can train at 60, 80 miles per week. But I had low-volume runners who could only get 30, 35 miles per week of training, and then they break down and they couldn't compete beyond that. And so you have to respect the differences. So I always say, the practice is really important, but you want people there on match day. You want people doing their best on match day. So we would do a lot of modifications. For example, if you have someone who's and you're in season, you have someone who's a nagging injury, and you want to keep them in the lineup, we would, whether it's a basketball player, a runner, you name it, a college tennis player, you modify practices, you modify, off-court conditioning. We had some players who literally, had some basketball players who had important games that we would literally almost not practice them at all just so they'd be available for the game. And so I think, if you're trying to get through the part of the season and you're in season, that's one way to do it, is create some modifications. And that's not, it's not easy unless you have a really great relationship with the coach. But I think most of them understand that. When you spend some time, you explain it. Say, look, I'll tell you examples. I had, we had a new Division I, head basketball coach. And of course, they're all gung-ho about trying to, get everyone ready and this and that. And, so I said, look, they had a Europe trip, and that's where they even get extra, games and practice before the season started. And I said, it was August. And I said, look, the kids just stepped on campus, all right? Your main part of the season doesn't even start till basically November, December. And you're going to go on a Europe trip. I go, yeah, let's say you have 15 guys on the team right now. You can already bet 3 of them aren't going to make it to the regular season, okay? So you have to ask yourself, how many kids are you willing to sacrifice, as far as injury risk to get through the season? Ask yourself that now before you start figuring out how much you're going to start training before. So then every 1 or 2 weeks we would check in, and he really actually worked hard to make it a slow progression and work them in so that he wouldn't have only 12 or 11 or 10 people by the time the conference games came around in January. So I think it's those things. It's structuring and having, I guess, a realistic view of, what people's talents are. And I mean, think about it. Tour players get hurt. They play, they have a very controlled environment. They have more resources than most people, and they're still missing tournaments and missing matches. And so I think you have to respect that up front. I think that's probably the biggest bet. And then the other thing for me is early recognition and early intervention. And this goes on from junior players. When you get something in its late stage, they typically are harder. I'll give you an example. The area that I'm spending a lot of time with is low back stress fractures. If we recognize a low back stress fracture in a junior tennis player within the first couple of weeks, and we say, look, you have back pain when you serve and it's hurt for the last 1 or 2 weeks, or you pulled out of a match or tournament, and if you stop and you're able to come in and see us, we can modify things. Sometimes we shut you down a little bit. Occasionally we get some tests. And then if we get early bone stress injury, within a few weeks, we may even be able to reverse things and get, transition you back. And then, overall, you might miss, 2 to 4 weeks, right? Let's say you keep serving, you keep playing through and say, I got to get through it. I got, Winter Nationals or something. I got another sectional tournament. And you kind of go through, and then 3 months go by and you come back, and now you have a crack in your lumbar spine that has probably anywhere from a 0 to 50% chance of healing. Then it's much harder. Then we're talking about a whole different ballgame, and you just can't go back in time. So particularly in high-risk stress areas, so that's like the low back, the inside the elbow, or any elbow really, and the shoulder. Now I have to add 2 more, the wrist and the hip, because of these very aggressive open stance forehand strokes. The game is obviously a lot more, I don't want to use the word violent, but it's a lot, more force on the body. So it's, again,
you're seeing hip injuries in juniors now?
Yeah, we didn't talk about those things at all. So there's a study came out.
Holy cow.
Yeah, looking at, there's a study that came out in looking at Spanish junior national players at their academies, and there was an alarming number of hip abnormalities on X-ray. And so, not to get too medical, but there's basically you can get a little bit of bone near the head and neck junction that we call a cam lesion. That predisposes you to hip impingement, right? And but that's near where the growth plate is. So the thought is that the intense training, like the high intense training, while you have open growth plates in the hip, are now creating more of these hip findings on X-ray. And some go on and do okay, but your anatomy predisposes you to hip impingement, but that predisposes you later on to get hip arthritis a lot earlier than other people. So it's a long-term cascade, and we're only going to find out about it now because this stuff has gone crazy in the last 10 or 15 years, right? So we'll find out. Right. Those findings are what we see now. So we have to see what those kids look like in 10, 20, and 30 years, and how many of them need hip impingement surgery, as they get a little bit older, how many of them go on to have hip replacement surgery. So yes.
Wow.
Yes, unfortunately, we do. And, yeah. And,
that's disheartening.
Well, I mean, I don't know. You know what? It's funny. It's not. I go around the country and have to speak about training volumes and sports specialization and all these different things that involve risk. And actually, Mark Kovacs is one we have. He and I both end up speaking a lot about this at various places. He comes from a performance side, and I come from a medical side. We kind of cross over in between. But I think I am not sure that I can change. Not just me, but we can change the momentum of what youth sports and junior tennis and the amount that's invested in. I just don't think it's realistic. There's so much that's invested. The tide has turned. Sports is done very differently. And maybe I'm on a number of national organizations, Aspen Institute and Mom's Team, and all these different kind of young athlete advocacy groups to try to just, do what we can to protect the health of children, but also try to promote the sport, right? And try to get them active in sports in a safe way, right? So I think I'm shifting my tide to saying, well, it may take maybe in 10 or 20 years this whole tide will shift, but I can't wait that long to try to make difference. So what I'm thinking is just early recognition, just like at least be able to advise people to say, look, the people that are hurt, you have a better chance. And say, well, I don't want another stress factor. And so then we go, okay, here's what you do. Go, here's your transition. Go slow. Here's the stroke modifications and so on and so forth. But I think, the best I can do right now is really help educate and using forums like this to say, look, when you get those early signs, it's so much more treatable than is later. And then for me in the tennis world, which is I guess a good segue to go on to the study that Mark Kovacs and I are doing, is we really believe that we can make some earlier changes by identifying the strokes and specific components of the strokes that create risk for future injury. So this study has really been, Mark and I put in, probably at least the last 6 months, regularly communicating, creating a really detailed what we call stroke efficiency rating. And basically it's just we're going to create a validated scale, about 99 points, and we have a number of other important factors in terms of how much you play and, so on and so forth. But basically it's a scale that we will use to do a really structured, simple, 5-minute video analysis on junior players and also college players, and then follow them. So we would just, do the video, do a survey after consent, of course, from the parent and the child, and then do the video, and then then in 6 months we would follow up with a survey, and in 12 months we follow up with a survey. And we'd like to see if the deficiencies they have in their strokes correlate with development of future injury afterwards, and see, hey, look, the kids who had 30 degrees of lumbar extension on their serve then go on to have low back problems later, or low back stress injuries or stress fractures. And so we think we can really help impact and, work closely with coaching and junior and college coaches and say, hey, look, here's some things that we can tell you that are creating these patterns. And it's not just for injury risk, it's actually for performance too. We want to measure, we're going to get radar guns and see how fast this, they're able, how efficient they can hit their serve, and there's ground strokes. And so we want to give them basically, see if the strokes can use the least amount of work to get the maximum amount of effort while minimizing injury. So that would be our ideal stroke, right? So we will be collecting this on, ideally probably, a couple hundred, junior players and college players. And actually, if anyone is interested, they can actually email, if I can give that out here, or contact us.
Sure,
we would
please.
love to enroll anyone. We're actually trying to do it, in bulk, at a bunch of targeted junior academies and universities and even high schools. But, I do some individual ones, and, it's just important to us. We actually just doing this on our own time. So I don't know why we keep doing more and more things like this, but we think we can make a great impact with coaching and players. So one email would be, you can just email our Emory Tennis Medicine email. It's tennismedicine@emoryhealthcare.org. And then that's tennismedicine@emoryhealthcare.org. And then you can even call my personal assistant at 404-778-1831. And if you have any interest in arranging it, most of them are in the greater Atlanta area. We might possibly, go outside of that, but most of them will be in the greater Atlanta area. And we have a number of places we target, but, we invite anyone who's interested in doing this. And I'm really excited about this because I just think, if we collect the data, we can, Mark and I talk about this, we can't be the only two people in the world who know about this. We have to have everyone have at least awareness. And whether it's not telling you how to coach, it's telling you, give us information and data to find, to recognize early where kids might be developing stroke patterns who might be either inefficient or at risk for injury, and then just help a different guide and tool for coaching it. So hopefully
that's fantastic.
we get the data that we need.
Well, I'm sure you will. I'm sure you'll have people chomping at the bits to have their kids be part of that and get that information early on, because any parent who has watched their kids suffer with repetitive injuries knows it's not just the wear and tear on the body, but it's the wear and tear on the psyche as well. And, you started talking about the mental health aspects and, the studies that the NCAA is doing. I'd love to get back to that a little bit and, kind of talk a little bit more about the impact of injuries on these collegiate players on their mental health, and where do the parents fall into this? Where do the coaches at the college level fall into it? Where do the trainers fall in? who's taking responsibility and who should be doing what to help these young athletes?
Great point. So Brian Hainline came on. He has just been working, chopping at the bit, changing patterns that have been going on for many, 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 many years. And it's just that NCAA is so large. There's so many institutions, and they're actually member institutions. So they're actually just membership institutions of a greater thing. So you don't have institutional control necessarily say, okay, Georgia Tech has to do this, and Emory has to do this, and so it's a little bit harder because you're dealing with many, many institutions. But one of the first things he came out with was what we call a best practices kind of recommendations about how that should look within a university, how your medical care should look within a university. So there's some inherent conflicts of interest, and I don't think this happens with tennis as much as it does with football and basketball, for example, where when the athletic department hires their medical staff, like an athletic trainer, or even the physicians, so then they're hired underneath an athletic director, so they report to the athletic director. And if a coach is hired and they report to the athletic director, then there's a potential for inherent conflict of interest. So if a coach is not happy with the medical care or the athletic trainer, restrictions or whatever it is that they might suggest, then they may play an influence on job security, and that, of course, or the relationship with the university, and that, of course, may influence your decision making on how to approach, discussions with a student athlete. And it's a very real thing, and it's getting better because some of these things are being more brought up to light, and we see them on TV and things like that. But and I don't think tennis is the biggest culprit. I'm sure it happens, but I don't think it's the biggest culprit at all by any stretch. This is more of a basketball football problem. But one of the solutions is actually to have a proper chain of command where you might have the team physician would be the lead of the medical care, supported directly by athletic training or other ancillary medical services, and not necessarily either hired by the athletic department or have a position that's external to the actual relationship with any of the coaching, so that your job is only to take care of the health of the student athletes, and you're not influenced by anyone else. And that would actually include the athletic director or administrative. You just be a doctor, or you be an athletic trainer, or you be a healthcare professional and just focus on that. And when that is the optimum environment, then that's a great starting point. Then you have it's a standard that's set. And I was speaking at University of Iowa, and they actually have that standard set, and I've always been impressed with that model. And a lot of places do, but they really are very clearly set up where that is how everyone views it. So they did pretty well. They actually got to the Rose Bowl and had a good year, and they have very, very few coaching problems or conflicts, because it's just basically medical care takes care of that part. And so as far as what some of his goals are is to try to help. He wrote, NCAA itself wrote, and he was, with a number of authors, but a manuscript which really, submitted to all of the boards and the academies, including our own in sports medicine, to support a mental health document to make sure that every university has appropriate services and chain of command and sequencing for any mental health issues. And that could be as simple as just negative feelings to depression to suicide, and you have to say those words. I mean, you have to into disordered eating patterns, and these things are all very real. And the reason it seems odd, like I'm a sports medicine doctor, people coming from injuries and all these types of things, but the reality is, you can get over an ankle injury, but when I get a disordered, a female athlete, college athlete, with a disordered eating pattern, that was going to be a 1 to 3 year long process of working with that athlete to get them better. So those are the ones that the student athletes themselves identified as where they felt there was the biggest need. So I think that's the path, and you can't be biased towards. He's a neurologist actually by trade, and I'm a sports medicine. I was originally trained in primary care, but you can't be biased by what you do is the most important thing. Just because I don't deal with mental health daily doesn't mean that we shouldn't be paying attention. I was going to add another study that we're going to do. You go ahead. You can comment.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say, I think it's really important that we talk about and, start to make this part of day-to-day conversation, especially with our young athletes, that it's a real thing for a physical injury to lead to depression or to lead to motivation issues or to lead to eating disorders. I mean, these are real connections that happen all the time. And I feel like we, like you said, we tend to focus on the physical side of it. We can fix the ankle injury. It's the other part that often tends to get swept under the rug, and if it's not addressed and solved in some way, shape, or form, then it starts a downward spiral for these kids.
Yep, you hit it. Yep, I mean that's the unless we're asking about it, you won't know about it, right? And don't forget, student athletes are generally intimidated by their coaches because in a lot of ways the coaches control if they're on scholarship, their scholarship decisions. As many people may realize but may not fully realize, is your scholarship is not a 4-year scholarship. It's a 1-year decision about whether you get a scholarship again the next year, and that's just how it is. And so there's no guarantee, and you could be on partial scholarship, you could be full, and then that really makes a big difference. So in general, student athletes are a bit intimidated by doing anything that might not please their coach. And it's not always in a negative way at all. I think there's a lot of adoration for so many coaches. I tell you, the ITA coaches that were there were great. They were so concerned about their student athletes. They were they said after I almost missed my flight, there's so many people who came up and asked very specific questions about how they could help their student athlete get back from whatever it was they were dealing with. So this is in no way saying college coaches are bad. I think I want to open the door and say college coaches have an enormous influence on athletes at all levels, way before they even get to college. And so I think, in particular while they're at college. And so I think it's just more of keep checking with them and seeing how they're doing. And, I work on as a medical, I'm on the player medical advisory panel for the player development programs for WTA. And, they recognize 20 years ago, this is, we were doing a 20-year review. They recognized over 20 years ago that it was a challenge to get on the tour and be at that level and have, a lot of other stuff to deal with. And a lot of those were, in fact, their happiness, their motivation, their mental health, and among injuries and, nutrition, many other things. So they created, 25 player development programs that are administered and done in so many ways. They do anything from senior mentoring. They have Billie Jean come out and talk to them. There's so much work and invested in making sure that they have positive, emotional, and healthy experiences. They stay on the tour for a long time. We don't have those same kind of resources for a college athlete, and definitely don't have those resources for junior tennis players. It is it's college I love because it's team, but it's still very individual competition, and it's tough. And so I think the more times we ask, the more resources we make available. I know when I was in Chicago, and I hope to start that here, I did junior tournament training educational programs every 2 months, and so we could bring all the student athletes who compete against each other on the court all the time, but bring them in a room and just go over various topics that would help them feel better, just about preparing for the growth of themselves in the sport. So I think those are some of the things that you kind of touch on that, it would be the more we have, the more we ask your own athletes, the more you ask your own son or daughter, how you doing, and, how are things going? And, I think that, just checking on those things, I think, helps. And then, slowly over time, we work on providing more resources to keep them. Again, the end point shouldn't be sophomore, junior, senior year of college. The end point for me is when you're 80 and you're playing 80s in Alta. That's the end point for me. You can't be 22 as the end point for, I've resurrected literally at least 12 to 15 college tennis player careers, my friends who quit it, they threw their rackets away, and I said, that's ridiculous. How can you not enjoy the sport you put so much time in? So I would force them on the court and play on one of my summer league teams or anything, because, it's just sad for me to watch people throw away a racket for no reason. So I don't know why I'm so passionate about it, maybe because I need to find my AA team and want to make sure there's enough guys around to play with, but I just think I keep going back to, kind of a lifelong goal for this. And so I guess I could talk about another study that we're doing. We were very concerned about this whole concept of college athletes not having great experiences, and we don't have much information about how that trickles down to junior athletes, because it's telling us, these lifespan work is telling us that college athlete experiences may not be as positive as we thought they were. So is that the same for juniors? And so we are now going to, and what's the best reflection of a junior experience, like lifespan, like later on in life, is it's probably your parent. And so if your parents have had positive experiences and they're still positive about exercise and the sport that they play, there may be a good chance that you would be. So we're doing a parent-child study where we're recruiting this summer with one of my Emory medical students who's going into pediatrics, basically about 60 parents and kids. So a diet. So in other words, the parent and child, younger kids like 8 to 15 years old, and we want to do like qualitative data. So we'll spend like an hour interviewing, getting blood pressure and weight and all these things, but then interviewing them and finding out every aspect of their decision about how much sports they play, why they chose their sport, how they cope with injury, financial stressors, you name it. And I have a very, very interested PhD student in South Africa who teaches at a tennis academy, who wants to compare our American model to a South African model with hopefully similar amounts of, kids and parents. And so we'll be recruiting this summer. But again, like if you have a name and an email, we would love to get more people involved to really kind of get down to how is this affecting our junior players. And again, you can contact my assistant if you have any, interest at all in this, and we'll reach out to you later. Just give us your email and we'll contact you later. It is 404-778-1831 or tennismedicine@emoryhealthcare.org. And again, all these things, I don't know why I just keep doing them. They're just done on my own time because I have interested young minds like medical students and PhD students who really want to ask good questions. So I think I'm interested to see what our data will show on what's happening with junior athletes. I'm a little concerned that we're going to find out that they're less happy than we think they are.
Well, I think there's a lot of that, and I think you are going to find that, and it's very disheartening to hear from kids who really are not enjoying themselves out there. And I think a lot of it has to do with, the sacrifices required to get good enough to be eligible. It's disheartening. I mean, I'll just leave it at that. I think what happens, in some of these scenarios is the coaches are overwhelmed, as you and I have said already in the show, but the kids don't really have anybody to turn to other than the coach. So if they're not getting what they need from the coach at the collegiate level, it's risky to go above the coach's head and go to the athletic director or a liaison or whoever. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on these kids to kind of suck up some things that they might not feel is in their best interest, but they don't really feel like they have much choice. And so that all goes back to that whole mental health thing. There are just so many factors that play here. And, I'm always hesitant to talk about the negative things that are going on because I'm like you, Neeru. I love the sport. I think it's a fantastic thing for kids to do, for families to do, and so I don't want the message ever to be, don't choose tennis. I want the message to be, let's work together to make sure that we keep the sport a positive experience for as many people as possible. And I think that's your goal as well.
Oh yeah, and part of the actually the real intent of this parent-child study was to show, you may actually choose a specialized, or we talked about this the last time we were on the show a few months ago, and you may choose to have your child specialize and focus on tennis early, and they may actually have very, generally positive experiences, and if they are exercising as an adult, and you as a family are all happy and exercising as adults, and you go play tennis together, and you are on vacations together, and tennis has been nothing but a positive experience, I want to show, or I'd love to show that those parents who have, I actually, one of the questions we ask is, how much time on an average week do you exercise, with your son or daughter. And so I actually love seeing families get involved, and I'll be very biased. I'll take any sport, but particularly tennis. It's just one of the neatest things to see is, a mom and a dad. It doesn't matter how good they are, just out there with their kids playing. And, I think that's just, it would be great if that was a longer-term model. And so if we could show that, there are really good success stories, and when we do have, what we'll do is we'll paint out with this qualitative data, you can find themes, and you'll find themes of positive, healthy environments. And I hope some of those themes are, parents who had made good sports selection and continued to exercise and they're there, and then, and then the role model, and they also want to do that. And some of them are very competitive, and you have some parents who are former college athletes, and they're very competitive, but yet it's central to them to all continue to want to do this, which is very different than I was at the pool this morning, and I'm not going to say where I took my son to go. We were just in the swimming pool. He actually can't even get up in the morning to make his early swim lessons, and I just go, you know what, that's just the way it is. So I just take him anyway, and he saw his coach, later in the morning, because he's like a teenage kid all of a sudden, just can't get up. And coaching his 6-year-old girl. He's 3. Couldn't get up. He's like, I can't get up for swim lessons. I was like, okay. So I said, but even if we missed it, I said, that's fine. He'll say, I want to go to the swimming pool. I'm just not a morning person. This is the point. So we make it to the pool, and like, look, he's had some swim classes, and he knows he should be doing this with a pedal board or the reality is half the time he doesn't do any of that stuff, and that's fine. He loves being in the pool when I'm in the pool, and we just have fun. But we saw the 6-year-old girl taking an individual swim lesson, 6. I thought she was pretty good, okay, and she was doing great. And 10 feet from the pool with a dad who pulled up a chair and who looked like he hadn't worked out in about 15 years, looking at her, and every time her stroke was off, would just glare. And then he finally walked over, pulled her out of the pool, and I just saw her in tears. And there's no interaction that should happen in a 6-year-old taking any sort of lesson anywhere that should result in tears, except that she said, I want to do drugs, and you say no. Like, there's nothing that you could say. There's no reason for him to actually be at the swim lesson aside from where all the other parents sit, 50 yards away. Like, what is? And so when I see this happening, we walked over, and my 3-year-old and I actually said to her when the dad wasn't there halfway through the pool, we said, we think you're really good. And she just said, thank you. And she was really sweet, and just it really broke my heart to watch that interaction. And I think, there's so many positives that can happen. And if he wasn't twice my size, I might have actually said something, but I'll have to say it through data, okay, and present data and in an organized fashion. But I think the better, when we get better environments for all sports, I think it'll be good. And I think, like you said, look, my work is trying to put a positive spin on what we might see, and just recognize when we see patterns that are not, good, and just say, hey, look, we can do better. College tennis by and far has low injury rates. Like I said, there are probably other issues that don't get captured in data that and probably less resources for the tennis player. What I told the college coaches, I said, look, I know what it's like to be a college tennis player coming into the training room. It's in the fall when college football is going on, or men's basketball. Like, you are like number 10 on the list at the minimum. Like, people, and you might just say, look, the back of my shoulder is sore, when I'm serving, and it's really affecting my second serve, and I've lost a couple of matches, and they look at you kind of like, did you dislocate your shoulder? Like, that's what I'm dealing with right now. So while it's affecting your life and it does make a difference, relative to the other things that are going on in the college athletic training room, it may not actually carry the same weight. And so I think it is actually important to pay attention to those things. I do. I spend gobs of time on court trying to help, modify strokes, just minor things in strokes, just to help, improve, even a little bit of what you might do on court to, kind of overcome a little bit of an injury. So I think
you're providing the perfect segue to talk about tennis specific training and tennis specific medical care for these collegiate athletes. And we all understand that tennis is low on the totem pole in terms of college athletics. I mean, programs are getting cut right and left, and it's not a money-making sport, and so it often gets swept under the rug and, whatever. But that doesn't change the fact that when you've got 12, 15 young men and women on a team, to those 12 to 15 people, this is the most important thing that they're doing, and they deserve to be trained properly and cared for properly in terms of medical treatment. And so, what are some questions that these athletes need to be asking during the recruiting process? I mean, the questions, we know the questions to ask the coach about, and we know the questions to ask other players on the teams and that kind of stuff. But what about the off-court training? What about the medical care that's available?
Great
Who do
question.
we talk to find out?
Probably a really hard question for a 16, 17, 18-year-old to ask. That's a really great question. Basically you ask, what happens when I get hurt? Who do I see, and how am I taken care of? And then what happens as far as my return into progressing back into the lineup? Like, how do you approach that process? And then who does your tennis, the conditioning and strength and training for your tennis players, and do they understand tennis? And, we can make a little plug for Mark Kovacs's work as, ITPA to try to get tennis-specific, athletic trainers and tennis-specific strength and conditioning specialists so they can really understand the components. And I'll list a couple of those things off here. And, obviously, I know a fair amount of stuff, but, in the town where Mark Kovacs is, I won't pretend to be an expert around him. But a couple of simple things is when you're on court, this is juniors or college tennis players, you should do conditioning in ratios that are appropriate for tennis players. So work-rest intervals about 1 to 2, up to 1 to 5. You do things in like 3 to 15 seconds. So you go real hard for 3 to 15 seconds, and then you have a rest period for 1 or 2 rest periods. You should do agility-based things, so just doing suicides up and down or running, a mile or 3 miles or something like that isn't, necessarily what's going to help you as far as developing some of your best skills. And you have to maintain it. And in a 10-week period, we know that doing that type of thing in addition to regular practice is effective. The problem is that actually, and Mark showed this, if you remove that, you work hard on it, and you go home for, the summer, or you go home for college or winter break, after 5 weeks of saying you're going to do it unsupervised, you lose basically everything. And so that's why one message I told the college coaches about conditioning is it's a maintenance program. And I think having some of your time allotted towards tennis-specific conditioning rather than just only hitting ball, may help protect you from some of the amount of wear and tear. And then hopefully, and as you know, many of the tour players make the physical component of tennis such a huge priority now. And I know that some colleges do, but some colleges really don't have a lot of it. So I think it's a good question to ask is who does it, and do they understand tennis?
Right. And so what happens to the player that gets to college and the training isn't tennis specific, doesn't follow the recommendations coming out of ITPA and Mark's organization, and suddenly you're seeing injury after injury after injury. I mean, again, this is, it's a real concern because the athlete, their first line of defense is the coach, but the coach is the one setting up the training. So, what's the athlete supposed to do at that point? It's a real tricky situation for sure.
It is. Yeah, and I'm probably not going to be able to give you an answer because it is dependent. So the more coaches that are more interested in making sure that you do all those things, the better that we are, right? The more coaches that say, hey, look, let me evaluate what we're doing for our conditioning. I actually think, to be honest, I actually prefer a coach who understands tennis to learn and acquire some conditioning and strength training, at least this conditioning, on-court conditioning stuff, and integrate it into practice. I actually prefer that to actually trying to teach a strength and conditioning person who has no interest in tennis the nuances of tennis-specific movements and those patterns.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually been easier in my experience to have a coach really take that on. So it's an additional responsibility, but I think it's really great. Jason Marshall, who's a friend of mine who used to play on the tour a bit, and he's the head coach at Georgia State now. He had me come out a little bit, and he asked so many good questions. He's like, does this help with that? And, so I'd go out with his team, and, we would do a few things that were really kind of specific. And now, it doesn't have to be 30 things. He's like, yeah, we've been still doing these things, and the girls like it. There's a little variety, and they understand it because it's all relates to what you do on the tennis court. So I think if you can, and it may not happen for a student athlete, say, hey, coach, why don't you go get ITPA certified? But I think,
right.
Parents actually are good. But parents actually can be people, hey, we're considering your college. We really want to know, where, because we know when we were juniors, for example, we really trained hard in a tennis-specific manner, and we want that to continue. And, can you tell us a little bit about how you integrate that into your practices? Or I think those are really good questions to ask before you choose your school. And like I said, there's some really, really great coaches who want to integrate these things. And, the sport is changing and it's getting more physical, and I think the more people who will understand it, the better. There are, a few things. I actually gave us some cases actually to the coaches, and I said, hey, look, how do you approach each of these things? And for example, I gave a case of someone cramping, and what is your what's your recommendation for the kid, or when they have fatigue, or when the inside of the elbow hurts or the back hurts when they serve, and so they were really challenging cases, and it can't. I think you have to stay integrated in the coach should stay integrated in the whole process. So when these things happen, you don't just go see the athletic trainer and I don't know about it, but I think it's especially in tennis players, there's so much crossover of what you do on court, and how you can modify your preparation, prior to a match. And I think, the more the coach is involved in that process, and recognizing when a player just doesn't look right, I think the better. And I always say, I'm always happy to be a resource. I think my contact info is out there. I told all the coaches, I gave my email out. I was like, you know what, call me, because I know that sometimes there's not enough resources to help with some of these situations. But, I think the more you find out about your coach at the college level and even the junior level, who's interested in some of these things, I think you'll be in better shape.
Sure. And hopefully the ITA will continue to invite you and Mark and other medical and fitness-based professionals to speak to the coaches and help continue to educate them. And, maybe the ITA can really take the lead here in terms of recognizing the coaches who are getting this knowledge and this education, and encouraging every single collegiate coach out there to have the information available, whether they go through the training themselves, or they have their assistant coaches go through it, or they work with their training department at the school, or the fitness department at the school. But somehow, these kids' health needs to be preserved. And, I'm 100% in agreement with you, Neeru, that, the goal here is to keep these kids on the court when they're 80. And they can't do that if their bodies have been so beaten up through their junior years and their college years.
Yeah, I'll make one last plug for the athletic trainers and the medical people involved in taking care of these tennis players. I'm the current president of the Society for Tennis Medicine Science, STMS. So if they can get a membership, and actually that's just journal and newsletters and constant publications and updating on the medical side of tennis players, and you just go to tennismedicine.org and you can look up how to get involved in there. And I think if there's any medical people listening, athletic trainers, physical therapists, and doctors, and anyone on that side, I think, and even performance people, strength and conditioning, and even coaches. We actually have coaches who are interested enough to kind of learn about the latest from the medical side. So it all kind of comes back down to what I think is the most important thing, is just education. And that's why I always thank you for letting me on this show, because I think it reaches a lot of people I can't reach otherwise through some of my work.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, and I'm looking forward to the next installment. And for my listeners out there, just know that Dr. J is a resource for us at Parenting Aces. If you have issues that you're facing with your player that you'd like his input on, or you'd like us to do a show on something specific, please just let me know, because he has graciously made himself available to us, and we're both based in Atlanta, so it's pretty easy for us to record a show, and we can find a time between our own tennis matches to get on air together and get the information out to y'all. So please use him as the resources he is and wants to be. And Neeru, thanks again so much. I know your family is chomping at the bit to get you back in front of them, so I'm going to let you off the hook here, but I really appreciate all the work you're doing and your willingness to share it with Parenting Aces.
Great. Thank you so much, and look forward to the next time we'll
Geico presents sharing versus oversharing. Today, Bridget Griffin shared a video of her daily yoga routine, 2 self-help articles, and her new blog called Build Your Inner Bridge with Bridge. Girl, your sharing has turned into oversharing. No worries, Bridge. Geico has some info worth sharing with your 7 blog followers, like how you could save money on your car insurance, update your policy, and report a claim just by visiting geico.com. How's that for building your inner bridge? Bridge? Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.